Hello and welcome to the Peas and Quiet podcast. On this podcast, we discuss all things gardening, including growing veggies and flowers and how to create your dream backyard alongside nature. My name is Robin. I'm an environmental scientist turned full-time flower farmer and gardener, and I'll be your host for this podcast. Ideas of some gardening jobs to get done during rainy weather. We have been experiencing some intense weather lately, and I have been thinking of things to do inside that don't involve getting drenched in the rain. So I wanted to share some gardening jobs that you might like. I also wanted to do a bit of a catch-up. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to the land, waters and communities. We pay our respects to elders past and present and thank them for protecting our lands, coastlines and ecosystems. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Peas and Quiet podcast. Today we are going to be discussing all about winter in the garden. Next Friday, a week from when this podcast is coming out, will be the winter solstice. So I thought it was only fitting to do kind of a wintry episode and just chat through some of the jobs that you might want to work through throughout winter in your garden. Obviously, this is going to be the complete opposite if you are in the Northern Hemisphere. So you can save this episode or just take some notes for the next half of the year. But yes, we are going to be discussing winter and just some jobs that I've been working on in the garden and maybe something that you might want to work on as well. Lately, the temperatures have really been dropping and I'm on to wearing 2 jumpers now rather than 1, and I absolutely love it. It is probably one of my favorite seasons, at least for where I live. We don't have a very, very cold winter, like we don't get hard freezes or snow or anything like that. We're right on the coast on South Coast, New South Wales, so it is quite mild. Now, I might not have these same thoughts if I lived in a different area, but where we are right now, the winters are actually quite mild and quite nice to be outside, actually getting some garden jobs done. That is when we're not getting torrential rain like my other episode where I discussed all of the rain that we've been having. That is kind of a fluke, like that is not normal. Normal here is to definitely get a few cloudy, rainy days throughout winter, but generally it's not too bad here. And the winter days where it is sunny, the temperatures are really nice. I, however, am a little strange and I don't actually like the sun. I don't like gardening out in the sun. I much prefer a nice, cold, cloudy day. But for those who do like the sun, they're really nice days. It's currently just gone 5 o'clock when I'm recording this episode in the evening, and it is starting to get very dark outside. So that is something that I've just noticed lately, how dark it is. And as we approach the winter solstice, that is what happens. We start to have the shortest day of the year. And with this darkness and the cool weather, I just crave coziness. I crave just feeling nice and cozy, baking some nice little treats for myself, getting a few hours of gardening jobs done here and there when I can, but not really focusing too much on the garden. I really love that winter can actually be a season of rest. And this hasn't always been the case for me when we lived in the subtropics, and I've also lived in the tropics as well up in northern Queensland. Winter was kind of the time when you did stuff. It was the time when you get out and about and you do all the gardening, you do all of the jobs. You can even grow like tomatoes and lots of veggies in those times of the year, because summer is more when you turn inwards and you retreat a little bit from the heat. or at least that's been my experience with living in warmer climates. One of the main reasons why Scott and I moved from Brisbane and the subtropics was because we do love cold weather. We love the change of season and really feeling all of those different emotions throughout the year and being able to be outside for the majority of the year in a temperate climate. And that's not the case for everyone. Like, I know some people love hot weather, and that's totally fine. That's the beauty of being able to choose what climate you want to live in. And thankfully in Australia, we have so many different climates to choose from. So I'm hoping that these jobs that I'm going to be talking about can be applied whenever it is truly the time for you. Winters can be really, really short up in northern Queensland and northern areas of Australia. It's not just northern Queensland. I just say that because that's been my experience where I've had a lot of time spent in my life. And sometimes there was a few cold days up there when these jobs might have been a little bit more applicable. All the way down to the southern Australia and Tasmania, where winters are quite long and can be quite brutal, particularly with a lot of the southerly and westerly winds that come raging through those areas, bringing snow and kind of more destruction and destructive winds. Can be the polar opposite to northern areas of Australia, where winters are quite calm and relaxing and is when you really want to be spending that time outside. So that's my little chat on winter and how it makes me feel and what I've just been craving at the moment. I've also been really loving being out in the garden, and I've also been loving being inside and retreating and reading my books. I've been really interested in reading a little bit more books on spirituality and nature spirits and things like that. And I find other people's experiences really interesting with that. Just hearing how people connect to nature and then how those strong connections are reflected in people's gardens and how people grow things. I think it's just really fascinating. Particularly, I've been very fascinated with the Findhorn community, which is a kind of more eco community or ecologically based community in Scotland. And I can do a whole episode on like alternative communities and that kind of thing, which I have in my previous podcast, the Earthly Roots podcast. Diane and I did speak about alternative communities, but I've been really interested in that. But anyway, that's off topic. That's just what I've been very interested in and delving into lots of different research and books and articles on that. Let's get back to the topic of today's episode, which is gardening in winter and some of the jobs that you might want to work on. And I'm going to kind of just apply this to my garden to kind of give examples, because I find that's the easiest way to do this podcast, is to really just reflect on what I've been working on in the garden. And I know a lot of people can relate to a lot of this, but if you can't, I hope that it's still interesting to you. I know a lot of people just like to have something on in the background while they're working on things or working in the garden. So yeah, I always do appreciate the feedback. I've been loving reading the comments about the podcast. You can leave comments on the YouTube channel or also on Spotify and I think Apple Podcasts as well. So yeah, thank you so much if you have left a comment or left a review. Very much appreciate it. One of my cats just got on the couch with me, so if you hear some noise in the background, that could be him. He's currently purring and having the time of his life in this blanket that I have next to me, kneading and making some biscuits. So Rocky's going to join us for this podcast. But anyway, getting into the jobs. One of the first things that I have been doing and really making a priority for this time of the year is tackling some of the larger weeds that I have in the garden. I know it's kind of a little boring to talk about weeds because it's just something that we do in the garden as gardeners, and I feel like we're always complaining or discussing about what weeds we're dealing with, but it's true. It is a really good time to be focusing on just getting an hour or two of weeding done when you can. And that's because it can be quite pleasant to be outside and weeding while it's nice and cool. You don't really get that hot and bothered. And the weeds are also coming out a lot easier throughout winter, or at least that's been my experience. Obviously, it depends on what weeds you're working on. For me personally, I am dealing with a lot of the grasses that I let go throughout summer, some quite large grasses that have grown into the flower farm. And in wintertime, they go a little bit more dormant. And this is a good time to also just place some cardboard or a tarp over them and let them just die back a little bit, and you'll be able to either pull them out really easily, or you can cut them back to the ground and really heavily mulch them with some cardboard and other materials to really just smother them out to make sure that they don't grow back vigorously in spring, or that you let them go to seed and that their seeds spread everywhere. It is also a really good time if you live on a larger property to be working on those larger weeds. So things like around here we have a lot of problems with lantana, privet if you're on riverways, tobacco weed. There are quite a few, and there will always be weeds to deal with if you have a larger property. Now's a really good time because now they're not in that really vigorous growing stage. You can get them now while they're a little bit more dormant with either whatever method that you have to do. I did do an episode with Jeff from Whitbird Environmental where we talked about weed control and his experience as a bush regenerator. I used to work with him also as a bush regenerator, and we had some really good discussions on how he tackles weeds and the methods that he uses. So I definitely recommend checking that out if you are dealing with weeds on your property. But you really can get a lot more of this hard labor work done in winter. So removing weeds, I know it's not the most fun activity, but it can become even a little bit pleasant in winter. That's how I feel when I go out weeding and doing some jobs in the garden. I actually quite enjoy it. So maybe pop on a podcast, pop on a previous episode of this or a YouTube video or something, and just get some weeding done. And I promise you, you will thank yourself in spring and summer when those weeds don't pop back up again. Another one that I have been working on is making compost, my favorite topic and my favorite thing to talk about. So I'm going to hold back and we're not actually going to talk about it too much because I do have a podcast video coming out soon all about the frequently asked questions that I get about composting. I'm very excited for this video, but making compost throughout winter is a really great job to do. And this is because you can be collecting a lot of materials around winter. If you live in an area with deciduous trees, it's great to rake those up and add to the compost. If you live near the beach, grabbing some seaweed, granted you're not taking too much and that you are allowed to take it, definitely make sure to check your local guidelines and definitely don't take from things like national parks or protected areas. But I do know that taking some seaweed here and there for the garden is definitely allowed. And in some of these areas, like around us right now, we've had a lot of high tides lately. There's been a lot of nutrients that has washed into the bays around us from all the floods. And there's actually an overgrowth, or there is a little bit of an imbalance in the ocean at the moment. And so there is just an overabundance of seaweed at the moment washed up on the beaches. And what I like to do when I go and collect a few bags of seaweed, sometimes it's seaweed, but a lot of the time it's also seagrass. But whenever I'm out and collecting, I'll also just have one bag and I'll use that to collect rubbish as well. So the activity becomes not just me going to collect things for the garden, but I'm also cleaning up the beach, which is always something that needs to be done. I think Scott gets a bit annoyed at me sometimes because I'm constantly picking up rubbish and picking up things. Like I actually sometimes cannot walk past something and not pick it up and put it in the bin. Like it's a compulsion, and I'll sometimes leave something if, I don't have the hands or I just can't pick it up. And then I'll think about it for the rest of the day feeling like I'm a horrible person, which I know I'm not. But that's just me. That's just me. I really, really hate seeing rubbish and people littering in nature. And yeah, if I ever saw someone doing that, I would not be able to hold back. But yes, I really do appreciate it when others are also picking up rubbish. So yeah, if you are going out and collecting things like leaves or seaweed or seagrass, or I know a lot of people go around and pick up like pine needles and things like that. If you do find any rubbish, also grab that as well. But it really can be a good time just to pile up all of these different materials, creating different layers. And if, it also rains, then you're going to be adding that moisture into the compost bin. And you can get your compost pile nice and full of nitrogen as well, particularly throughout winter if you live in a really cold area, to get that process of decomposition kick-started. So then you can start to have that decomposing now and throughout spring, and then maybe like summer or in the middle of summer when you need some more compost for your beds, then you can harvest it then, making sure to just turn it every now and again if you want a quicker compost. And then you'll have some beautiful nutrients for your garden. Also, speaking on the nutrients side of things, feeding your plants and garden is also something you can work on throughout winter. Really making sure that if you have a worm farm, that you're keeping that nice and healthy. That is where I get most of my fertilizer from my garden. I dilute what comes out of the worm farms, and it comes out as a liquid, and then I dilute that in water. And I have been implementing something called Fertilizer Friday. There's one other creator who I've seen does this. I'm sure so many people do it, but it's just a way for me to remember. So on this day when this podcast comes out, I will be fertilizing my garden and going around particularly to all of the flowers that I've planted and also my seedlings, and just giving them a bit of a feed. It's going to really help them boost root development, particularly when the weather is really cold. Your plants can tend to get a little bit stressed, but just making sure that you have really good biology and bacteria and just a diverse microbial activity in the soil is really going to help your plants be nice and strong and be able to withstand those colder temperatures. And fertilizing your garden and adding a bit of food for your plants before you do get things like heavy frosts is also going to really assist those plants at reducing their stress and just making sure that those roots don't have to worry about sourcing food and nutrients that they need to survive over winter. So just boosting that nutrients in the soil is going to really help. Another thing that I have been working on is planning my garden beds, and more so actually planning my outdoor spaces for spring. I kind of have a set plan of where things are going in spring and where I'm planting things for spring in terms of the flower farm and a lot of the other food that I'm growing. What I do really want to do is create more beautiful spaces in the garden that are a little bit more temporary, because we are actually planning on moving next year at some point. Hopefully, that's fingers crossed the plan. But for now, I really want to create some calm spaces in my garden that I can work on now, so that when plants do grow a little bit more vigorously, that I can enjoy that and actually use plants to create spaces in the garden. Something I'm always trying to do is just build up like a little bit more privacy from the neighbors. So I've been planning on just planting a few things over on the fence, like wistringers, which are great for creating a hedge. So these are also called coastal rosemaries, and I love these. They just grow so well here, and they're probably one of my favorite plants around here. And I've also been propagating rosemary, the actual herb, and lavender. And the reason I've chose these three plants is because they grow so well in our clay soil. I don't need to amend the soil at all. I can just plant them in and they grow really, really quickly. So I'm going to be kind of using those as a tiered hedge to create a little bit more privacy and block the neighbor's view so that I can just come out in the garden a little bit more and have some peace and quiet and enjoy my time out there. I've also started to place pots around the place to also kind of create a little bit more of a cozy vibe around there. And I'm craving a little bit more enclosed spaces. This is good for winter when you also want to feel nice and cozy, but also in summer when we have a lot of crazy weather, and throughout spring we have really windy weather. I really do want a little bit more hedging in the garden and pots with fruit trees and things like that surrounding the places that I have seats in the garden so that it can feel just a little bit cozier. And winter is definitely the time for moving things around in the garden, creating different spaces to kind of get yourself set up so that you can see whether you actually really like things being where they are, and also for the plants to be able to grow and to fill in those spaces that you're planning. Something that I know a lot of other people are working on right now is just last minute preparations for frost and cold weather, maybe even snow. If you're in the southern areas of Australia and more temperate climates, and also lots of areas in Australia where you do get frost and cold weather. So just thinking about having things like frost cloth on hand, or even just old blankets and sheets that you have in the house if you want to cover things like citrus trees or rows of sensitive crops if you do think you are getting a frost. But also to make sure you water the soil and add moisture into the soil if you know the next day or that night you are going to be getting a frost, because if the soil is a little bit more moist, it can hold heat a little bit better than if you have really dry soil. We don't tend to get too many frosts here, but down the very back of the property, I definitely have seen quite a lot of little icicles on the ground, and it is so beautiful. And I really, really enjoy walking around after the frost has hit on a frosty morning. It's so, so beautiful. But it can start to get a little bit annoying if it's happening every day and trying to ruin the plants and the small seedlings that you have in the ground. So just doing whatever you have to do, just making sure that you have things on hand on the off chance that you are going to get a frost, or if you know that you are, then implementing all of those things that you know that work for you. I have also been working on pruning some of the plants in my garden. And pruning is something that is really important to do at different times depending on the plant. There are a lot of plants that respond really well to pruning in winter. One of those, and that's the one that I have been working on lately, is pruning my roses. So giving them a nice prune. I prune them quite harshly here, and they seem to respond really well to that. Another thing you can give a cut back is for your perennial grasses if they're starting to look a little bit sad, or even things like chives and society garlic. I really need to cut back my society garlic. It's looking really messy and it just needs a real good refresh. So that's something I'm going to be doing probably tomorrow actually. Berry bushes, if you need to cut back any like raspberries or soft berry bushes that you might have. Same with grapes, crepe myrtles. We have quite a few of those in our garden that I'll be giving a trim. Hydrangeas and viburnums, again, something that I need to be pruning fairly soon. I pruned the hydrangea way too harsh last time. I do have it on a video, I think, but I really regret pruning it how I did because I just cut it back way too low to the ground. I'm not going to do that this year because I want more flowers than I did this year. So yeah, it was pretty disappointing, but just look up actually guides and guidelines on how to prune things if you are. I'm not an expert on these things. I learn by my mistakes, but yeah, with hydrangeas, I'm pretty sure they bloom, or at least the ones that I was cutting back, they were blooming on second year wood. So the one that we have in the garden, which is a very old-fashioned variety, was doing that. So yeah, I'm not going to prune that as harsh as I did. And yeah, any other deciduous plants that you have, give them a prune as well if you think that they need to. Sometimes steer clear of pruning a lot of natives, because a lot of Australian natives actually flower in winter or late winter and early spring. There are obviously some that don't, but make sure that if you are thinking of pruning your natives, that you just search up when their growth habits are and when they flower, to then just get an idea of when their more like off season is, so that you can prune around then and not sacrifice any blooms that might be starting, which might be really important for native wildlife around you. Another thing I'm doing, and this is kind of an obvious one, but I'm keeping on planting veggies. I am not stopping, and if you are in a climate where you don't need to, then keep sowing and keep growing things that you love and that you enjoy. So lots of things can be grown throughout winter, and you can continuously sow these throughout winter and then get an early spring or mid-spring harvest. Things like carrots, onions, leek, lettuce, spinach, broad beans, radishes. They're all really good examples. Same with a lot of brassicas, although the later you leave this, the more likely you are to get the cabbage moth butterfly when the warmer weather hits. So just keep that in mind. But you can also plant potatoes. I actually just got my potato delivery today. I ordered some seed potatoes and I'll be planting those probably next week. I'm going to be planting these in pots this year and kind of like grow bags and seeing how they do, just experimenting a little bit with these, mainly because of our clay soil and how ridiculous it is to grow root crops in the soil that we have. So I chose 3 different varieties this year. I am growing one of my favorites, probably is my favorite, which is Dutch cream. They're just a really good all-round potato, and they're really nice roasted or used as mashed potato. I'm also growing Kennebec. I think that's how you say it. I think this is a really good like chip variety of potato. And I'm also growing Nicola. So potatoes are usually classed as like early or second early or main crop potatoes, and that just refers to the timing of when you're going to be harvesting these and how long they take to mature. And usually they have different characteristics and sizes as well. So the Dutch cream that I have are a main crop, so they will probably be in the ground the longest. And like I said, these are really great for like roasting and boiling and mashing. The Kennebec are an early main crop, so I'll most likely harvest these a little bit before the Dutch creams. And these are basically an all-rounder potato. And then Nicola, which are second earlies, so these are a little bit earlier again, and these are again an all-rounder potato. I've tried all of these before, but I cannot remember trying Nicola or Kennebec. Dutch creams I love. I will always want to grow Dutch creams if I can. But yeah, I'm really excited to try out some potatoes in pots this year. I haven't actually grown them down here, but potatoes are susceptible to frost. So if you're getting really hard freezes, it might be best to wait until spring comes around. But absolutely now, if you live in more of a subtropical area, perfect time to get your potatoes in the ground. And also they're really readily available at your local nurseries. I know Bunnings has some. I saw some there the other day, and also online. I got mine from Garden Express, and I'm yet to open the box, but I'll be filming a video on that. So I'll also keep you updated here on how they go. Kind of coming back to the topic of planning your garden, you can also look out for things that are flowering in your area or taking notice of plants that you're really enjoying the look of in your area, if you are wanting to add some more color to your garden, or if you're just doing some window shopping and having, a few spaces to fill, now is a really great time to actually just walk around in like botanic gardens local to you, or local parks, or just go for a drive and meander through some suburbs, seeing what other people are growing and what is looking great at this time of the year. It's a perfect time to gather inspiration, and whilst we can use online and Pinterest and YouTube and Instagram to get this inspiration, I find just it is really best if you drive around and have a look at what's happening in your area, because that will be specific to your area and your climate, to really get the best information of plants and how they're growing and what people are growing right now. So that is something that I've been doing, just checking out what people are growing. Unfortunately, I can't be buying a lot of trees. Well, I can, but it wouldn't really make a lot of sense to plant trees right before we're moving. But it is something that I love to do, and I'm definitely going to be visiting my community garden this weekend. They do like an open day every month just to see how their gardens are looking, and also gain some inspiration for something that I might be able to grow as an annual in my garden at this time of the year. Community gardens are fantastic, and gosh, I wish there was one close to me. Like I think it should be mandatory. I think it should be compulsory for every suburb to have a community garden, or at least like a compost hub or something like that, where like-minded people can come together and grow food and share in the community. It just makes perfect sense to me, and I don't understand why we don't do that. It's not a very big thing in Australian culture, really. It's starting to change in some areas, in some cities, but we have a long way to go here to adding gardens and edible landscapes into suburbia. That's all I'll say on that topic for now. If you want me to discuss more, I totally can, because I could talk for ages and ages on the importance of community gardens. But if you have one around, just go down, check it out. I don't know, see what people are growing. I think they are just some of the best things. And I have met just some of the happiest people working in these community gardens, either on their own plot or just as a collective. And it's always just a good time. So yeah, would recommend. Right, I'll wrap this episode up pretty soon. But another thing that you can work on is revisiting goals that you might have set at the start of the year. Just doing a good old check-in with yourself and making sure that you're on the right track, or even just set some more realistic goals. If the goals that you set at the start of the year, you know that they're unobtainable. It's the worst thing trying to work towards an unobtainable goal. You're way more likely to get a lot more things done if you actually just set realistic goals for yourself. So just sit down and maybe write a few points if you are that way inclined, like I am. I love a good list. I love a good goal setting session that I'll sit myself down with a notepad and write all of these things that I want to get done, and then go and do something nice for myself, or give myself a treat because I've sat down and worked through that list and written all these amazing things that I want to get done, rather than actually just going out and doing them straight away. But yeah, I really want to set some more realistic goals for myself for the end of the year. Now that we do have a baby on the way, and things are just going to look a little different for us. So I want to revisit those goals. And I'm hoping that Scott can actually come on the podcast soon, and we can talk about just our goals for the future, I suppose, or I don't know, just have a chat about how things are going to be changing in our lives. So let me know if you would like to have him on the podcast. Scott is my partner, if you didn't already know that. So I feel like that might be interesting, and I've been wanting to do an episode with him for a while, so might do that next week or the week after. But the last thing that I had on this list was just to sit back and enjoy your garden. Just sit back, relax, and take a bit of a breather. I know as a flower farmer, that's really difficult to do because I'm constantly just wanting to do things in the garden and keep working on soil and building soil and planting things and sowing seeds. But I really need to chill just a little bit more in this season because I always say to myself in summer, like, it's just so busy and I can't wait till winter till I can have a bit of a rest. That's exactly what I need to do, and I need to listen to my past self to do that now. Like I was talking about at the start of the episode, now is the time to sit back and relax and just enjoy a lot of the work that you've already put forward. Or if your garden just isn't it right now and you're not happy with the progress that you've made, or it's not where you want it to be, still just do something else. The garden will always be there and the busy period will pick right back up again, or again, you might already be in your busy time if winter is when you're doing all of your planting and growing things. But whenever it is your slower time in the year, really do savor those moments, because I think we can get really bad burnout in the garden. And unfortunately, if we don't let ourselves rest throughout winter and throughout these slower seasons, we're not going to have the stamina and the energy to be able to do all the things that we want to do in spring and summer. And that's usually when gardening just becomes hard. It is difficult maintaining gardens in summer and spring when the weeds are just going crazy and when you're burnt out because you haven't had a proper rest. And by a proper rest, I mean like take a few months just to relax a little bit from doing all of those hard jobs that you've worked on in the garden. And by all means, work through this list that I've spoken about today, but maybe do like half an hour here or an hour there rather than hours and hours of gardening, because that will happen again when all of the harvests come later in the year. And it's really important to just take care of yourself, take care of your physical health and your mental health, to work on all of those other hobbies that you might have in your life. I'm so guilty at wanting to start all of these hobbies that I want to do, like, I don't know, crocheting and cross stitching and all these crafty things that I always envision myself doing and actually make me really happy when I do them, but I don't allow myself the time sometimes. So pick up a book or whatever hobby that you want to work on and just allow yourself a little bit of a breather and enjoy your gardens just by sitting out there with a nice cup of warm tea and just observing what's happening in this slower time of the year. So that is it for today's episode. I really hope you enjoyed the little chat on winter in the garden. I would love to know what things you're working on in your garden right now. What jobs are you tackling? Is this your busy season, or are you having a little bit of a breather and a rest right now? I would love to know what's happening in your gardens. But for now, I am going to go upstairs and make myself some dinner, put on a cozy TV show. I need to finish my book tonight and just have some cuddle time with my cats because they are so cuddly in winter. Rocky has still not left my side this whole podcast. He's kind of snuggled up like a little donut right now, trying to keep warm. So I'm going to go make sure I set up a little bed for him upstairs and just enjoy a nice cozy evening. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I really hope you're having a lovely day wherever you are in the world. And until my next one, happy gardening, everyone.